Good morning, good morning. This is a letter from Cuban American to our greatest president, Mr. Donald J. Trump. Once again, Mr. President, I want to thank you for all you're doing for the Cuban people. But please, let us not change the current course that is helping the Cuban people achieve their freedom in order instead to help the dictatorship that keeps the people living under inhumane and humiliating conditions. What I'm saying this is because the 100 million that is over the table as a humanitarian aid, the aid, it's more than demonstrated that it doesn't help the Cuban people. The dictatorship, the Cuban dictatorship, has survived on foreign aid since 1960s, when it was subsidized by the former USSR, the Soviet Republic, then by their allies in the European Union and all its allies like Brazil, Mexico, and many others that give aids to the dictatorship. And recently, since the 2000s, the Venezuelan regime. Yet, every year the Cuban people become poorer, while the dictators, their families, and their associates become wealthier. President Obama made bad agreements, really bad agreements, extremely, I can say disgusting, with the dictatorship in Cuba. And the dictatorship has always failed to honor any of those agreements. Now the same pattern is happening again. I can tell humanitarian aids are on the table. Cuba doesn't need humanitarian aids. Always goes to the dictatorship. They own the island. They own the island. That's what happened with the dictatorship. They own the island. Everything that is going to get into the island is going to belong to them. The Cuban people belong to them. Cuban people in Cuba are slaves, and they are kidnapped by the dictatorship. They are looking for different ways to this issue. Humanitarian aid now, but for whom exactly? That goes directly to the dictatorship. Under what condition? What justification? I know you put on over the table that they need to change the regime. That's not going to happen, unfortunately. The only way is through an humanitarian intervention. As the church is going to be involved with this. The church have been involved in many of the aids and dialogue with the dictatorships, and all of them goes in favors to the dictatorship, to the regime, to the Cuban regime. With the leader of the Catholic Church, who in one way or another have always helped the dictatorship. We need to think about that, Mr. President. I am a Catholic person. I go to church. I do not support the aids that these men from the Catholic Church, and I'm talking about faith, I'm talking about the men, those who sins every day like me. They claim to represent the Church of Jesus Christ, but they provide to the dictatorship. Jesus Christ would never accept the oppression and enslavement of entire people. That's the way the Cuban dictatorship does. They have a slave. The Cuban people are their slaves, and they are kidnapped by them. And the church, the Catholic Church, and many of the churches, they support that. And Jesus Christ will never support that. The Cuban dictatorship, just like those of Venezuela and China, constantly lies. You will see in the future what happened with the China in the summit. They lie. They always do. That's what communists and socialists do. They lie. And they will continue lying in order to remain power. Please remember that they keep millions of slaves and hostages. Cuban people are slaves and they are hostages by the Cuban regime. As I say, any humanitarian aid sent to Cuba will, as always, be sold from the regime to the Cuban people as an inflated prices, and that money will continue funding the regime system of repression. On the other hand, a true humanitarian intervention will genuinely help the Cuban people and will bring down the dictatorship. The overwhelming majority of Cubans want real change. Cuban living on the island and the Cuban living abroad. Humanitarian aid is equal as aid to the regime. Humanitarian intervention is equal as freedom for the people. I know you are a person for freedom of the people. Cubans will be always in your favor when you free them. And what Cuban people truly want is freedom. As I said, thank you for everything you do with appreciation. A Cuban American who appreciates you, and thank you. Thank you, Mr. President.